Hello my loves, I'm FantaSims and welcome to my channel. I love turning Sims 4 into a world of fiction and fantasy. You can find my creations in the Sims 4 gallery, and if you like what you see here, be sure to like this video, subscribe to my channel, and hit the bell to be notified about fresh content. Also, stay tuned to the end of this video for a new series challenge that I need your help with. In this video, I'll show you how to take the object wheels we created in the previous tutorial and turn them into simple but unique fantasy arches. Together, we'll make something that looks like custom content without actually being custom content. If you missed part 1 of this tutorial series, you can find the link to it in the description below. In each part of this series on how to turn Sims 4 objects into fantasy sci-fi creations with TwistedMexi's tool mod, it will get more and more complex. In part 1, we started off easy, simply rotating objects in a wheel that can be saved to the library and used as a resource for unlimited projects. In this video, part 2 of the series, we will dive into actually making an arch together, but I will focus on simple objects and basic layering techniques, as well as using the elevate feature of the tool mod. In part 3, we'll look at complex arch designs as well as creative problem-solving techniques. In later parts of the series, we will dive into making dragons and spacecrafts, such as the ones you can find in my gallery, but we'll be making some new versions. Be sure to shower TwistedMexi with love and appreciation for this wonderful mod that has made these creations possible. Let's dive in. I'll first show you how I constructed an easy arch based on the wheel we made in part 1. Then I'll build a brand new arch that I have not created before, so that you can see the full process. So previously I stated that you can't duplicate rooms of debug objects. You have to keep pulling them from the library, which is why we save everything into a room and put it in the library. And that is true. If I try and copy and paste it, it'll be empty. And if I try and shift click to duplicate it, it'll be empty as well. But apparently, thanks to Kementari, I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly, they pointed out that you can duplicate saved rooms of debug objects if you hold the shift key when you're placing it from the library. So if I hold the shift key right now, I can actually duplicate it. So thank you for letting me know that. I'm a newbie when it comes to building. I didn't even realize you could do that, and if you're not familiar with that either, that will save you a lot of time. Thank you, Kementari, for pointing this out. I appreciate your feedback, and this is what makes the Sims community so great, because we can help each other out, inspire each other, and it feels like we're a family making creations together. Okay, so now I'm going to get on with it and show you how I created these arches that are already up in my gallery. Today's tutorial, we're focusing on simple objects and simple arches, and what makes an object simple, as you can see here, if you look at that green footprint, the footprint is the green grid underneath the object. Notice how the object is perfectly centered in that green grid, and that makes it really easy to rotate, really easy to keep track of the object and move it around. When we made the wheels in the previous video, we made sure that the bottom of the wheel sits flush against the wall, and that's fine, but I noticed when I was trying to create an arch that goes above this realm of magic door, it was actually ended up being a bit too low, and I will show you what I mean. You can see that it blocks off the very top of the door, and I noticed that by elevating it by 7 using the 9 key, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, when I elevated them all up, it allowed enough room for it to not block the door. Now your sim can still walk underneath it even if it does block the front of the door, but it just didn't look as good. But I didn't realize at the time that I could have just used the tool mod to elevate them. So when you're using the 9 key, you have to make sure everything stays in place and then go through each one and make sure that you count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 each time, or however high you're elevating it. It's actually a lot easier if you use the tool mod to elevate. So remember, if you want to use the mod, you need to have a sim on your lot so you can switch between live mode and build mode. This column on the right is the height at which I want to move my entire circle up to. This one on the left represents where it is at the moment. And I noticed that if I shift click like we did to rotate them in the first place, click the tool and then click the elevate feature, you can elevate it between -25 and 25. But I noticed that when you type in 0.1, that seems to be the equivalent of pressing the 9 key once. If I elevated these originally by 7 clicks of the 9 button, doing it by 0.7 elevates it at the exact same height. And so that's just something that's good to know, that instead of clicking each one with the 9 button, instead just shift click on the item, elevate, and I'll do 0.7 instead of clicking the 9 key 7 times. And there you go. And you don't have to worry about the object bouncing out of place. So that's a feature that is very handy, and I can't believe I didn't even think to do that when I first created these. So instead I individually elevated each piece. The next thing I did after I elevated the main wheel is I further elevated these pieces on top. So you don't have to keep the entire wheel the same height. You can play around with elevating some of them higher, keeping some of them lower, and it created a nice fan shape. I elevated it by 7 more again, and I really liked the way it looked. But I kind of wanted to add a bit more flair to it. So I'm going to show you how to layer wheels on top of each other to add an extra bit of dimension. Here I have made a smaller version of the big wheel. Remember, just by hitting the left bracket key and then the H key and going around each one and making it smaller, and the center is still in the same location, so that helps when you're layering it on top of each other. It's going to fit nicely. And I'm just taking the room and moving it on top, but pulling it forward enough that it doesn't get lost inside the original wheel. But as you can see, there's now a bit of a gap. Because it's smaller, it's not going to line up the same way as it did when it was bigger. And so this part can be a bit time consuming, but you're just going to push it back. Each one of them, you just push them back and reposition them. And to be honest, with simple objects like this, it's really not that hard. It might take you a couple minutes, but the great thing about creating these arches and putting the time into making them is that you can use multiples of them in a build. So you're not having to recreate an arch for every single area of the wall you want to put one. You're just copying and pasting or shift clicking from what you've saved in the gallery and just placing it. Now I'll go over some of the finishing touches that I did. As you can see, instead of mirroring this shape with this one, I added an extra piece at the bottom because I like that added flair, that added fan piece. I thought it gave it a better shape. Additionally, I wanted to create columns to support the weight of this arch because it looks like it's made of stone. I mean, in a magical build you can have floating stone arches if you want to, but I thought it looked a bit better to have some columns, and so I just used the original size of this piece, the same exact object we used to create this arch, and I elevated another one on top to create the pillar. But it looked a bit silly originally because I didn't have these ones, because look how skinny that is. So I made bigger versions and placed them, but in doing so it created this area that it doesn't look bad, it just looks a bit awkward. I like to think when I'm creating things in real life, would this support the weight? In real life, if you had a carved thing out of stone, would you create this awkward piece right here? Probably not. So I tried to hide it with another one of the column pieces at a 90-degree angle facing forward, and I just hid that front piece. And then I used these awesome magic flares. I use these on so many projects, they're incredible. And I will show you. If you look through the Realm of Magic debug objects, you will find 3 color flares. I call them flares, I don't really know what they're called, but they're these magical glowing whatevers. And you can get them in 3 colors. The teal one looks really good with the door, but because I was posting this to gallery, I thought that the regular flame colored one would suit more builds. And then I placed that in the front and it just looks like a great light, and it hides that awkward connecting point. So a lot of times my best ideas come from problem solving, because I usually am the one creating the problems when I'm layering objects on top of each other and it just looks a bit clumsy or awkward. And it created a really nice finish to it. Now if you notice, and I mentioned this in the previous tutorial, when you position objects on an angled wall versus a straight wall, it can sometimes shift the object slightly, and if you notice, you can see a difference between the centerpiece of the straight wall and the centerpiece of the angled wall, because the angled wall pulls objects further apart because the distance is greater on an angled wall than it is on a straight wall. So you will have slight differences. This one I didn't think was that big a deal. Now for this variation of the arch, you don't have to keep everything in a wheel shape. I played around with elevating this elevated fan part of the arch, and I elevated centerpieces even further to create more of this curved V shape, or I guess it's an upside down V shape. And then I just placed these angled ones. I just took another wheel from my library and played around with some of the other angles, and this one's a slightly different angle, as you can see. But I just played with placing them a little bit in front and seeing what would happen. And I like it because it has this ancient Indian, ancient Asian temple vibe, and it's a totally different vibe from this, even though it's essentially the exact same arch. I've just shifted some of the pieces slightly. Doing so, however, created another problem, as per usual, in that these columns, and you'll find a lot of debug objects are like this, are hollow underneath. I just found that this V shape right here, it's not horrible, but it just didn't quite look right. And so I did the same thing as the previous arch, and I used one at a 90-degree angle, one of these columns at a 90-degree angle, and put a light in it. Just hold the Alt key and you can place these wherever you want and just position it in there. And it masks this area, it hides it so that the focal point now becomes this glowing light, which is a lot more pleasing. Similarly, when I put this column at this angle and this one at a straight up angle, it creates a gap. And that does not look good. So I looked around for different objects I could use. I thought this one, the awning from Realm of Magic, I loved the design. The design in this looked like it went really well with the design of these columns. So I just angled it, elevated it, and just tucked it in there. And it hides that gap and looks like it's purposeful. It looks like it's supposed to be part of the carving of the stone. In this third variation of the arch, I decided to use another wheel that I had created that I showed you in the previous video, using the candelabras, and it's the version of the wheel that has 144 pieces rather than 36. Instead of elevating the wheel when it was only 36 pieces and then doing the thing I showed you last time where you move them by 5 and then move them by 2.5 to fill in all the gaps, yeah, like a rookie, I elevated each individual piece, and it took forever, and I do not recommend it. I like how it turned out, but next time I try and do something like that, I will not elevate it when it's 144 pieces. For this one, I wanted to create a completely different look for the columns, so I still used the same column design as I did in this one, but I increased the size of these torches, and it gave it like a flared out flower feel. And so I believe there were, I don't know how many of these I used, 3 or 4 of them, and I just sized it up and rotated it. Yeah, I used 4 of them, like so, and put that there. I didn't like how it created this hollow metal look because I wanted the arch to still look like it was carved stone. So to hide it, I placed these base game lamps. I changed them to a blue color. It was the best object I could find at the time to kind of block out that hollowed area and make it look purposeful. Now, if you want those lights to just be an architectural feature, you can turn all the lights off in live mode, or if you like the fact that they have a glow to them, you can turn them on. Now, it doesn't make a big deal with this build, but a lot of times when you have lights right next to an object, it usually makes that object glow and none of the other pieces glow, and it just looks a bit ugly. So usually if I'm using a lamp as an architectural feature, I usually turn it off, but on this one it actually looks pretty cool with it on. Then I used these stools and I made them bigger and elevated them slightly. It's the pub stool from Realm of Magic because it actually looked really cool as part of the column, and I used it on top as well because the top of the lantern, as you can see when I move, well, it flickers here, but that's hidden by the column here. But it had a bit of a flickering, you can see it right here. It just stuck out funky and it didn't look like it was part of the stone. So that's why I used the stool and elevated it up here just to kind of round out the top shape of the column. And then on top I used these orbs that you can find in the debug objects of Realm of Magic. They come in lots of different colors, but the white went really well with the white stone. And I put one sideways because the center of this wheel has this gold circle, which looks cool, but I didn't like how this piece of the stone was poking through. It looked a little bit tacky. So by just hiding that area, you still get the nice gold circle, but now it frames the orb and it looks more intentional. And it just has a better feel to it. So that's basically how I created 3 versions using the same exact wheel and pretty much the same arch shape and design, but just by moving some of the pieces in slightly different ways, adding different wheels of objects and some of the other items that you can find in packs, you can create really uniquely different looking pieces. Now I'm going to create a simple arch from scratch. I haven't made this before. I don't even know what I'm doing as I'm going into it. We will start playing playing around and see what we come up with. I'm using 3 wheel designs, and they are all from the Vampires pack. And this is a sized up version of these Debug pillars, and they have these like concrete, I don't even know what these are, but whatever, these concrete weighted things that keep them in the ground. And a lot of times when you're using a flat surfaced object and you rotate it, it can cause flickering objects, but for some reason this one doesn't flicker, which is awesome. Then this wheel was created with a pedestal, sized up of course, and then this wheel is made with an angled tombstone. And again, like I showed you in the previous tutorial, we can play around with the angles by using the comma and period keys to create some different shaped wheels. So I'm just going to take some time to play around and see what we can come up with. One more thing to keep in mind is when you're building 2 arches at the same time, a straight version and an angled version, always work on them both at the same time, because I've run into the problem of creating an arch and I get carried away building one of them, and then I go to recreate the same thing on the angled wall and I can't remember how many times I elevated something, how I shifted something, and so it's a lot easier if you work on them both at the same time. So with that said, let's get into it. So you can see that if you put in some effort to rotate some objects, you can whip something together relatively quickly. Now, not all of my arches happen this quickly, but I just took 3 different objects, placed them on top of each other, and you get this really cool, unique fantasy sci-fi arch that you can use in any build you want. And if I wanted to take some extra time, I could size everything down and make a smaller version. I would have to lower some of these things again down to a lower level, but you know, it might take probably half an hour to resize it, but to me it's worth it to put in a few hours creating these arches because it makes your build time so much faster. Okay, now for a challenge request. I'm working on a series to find the ugliest objects in the Sims 4 game, or the ones that you don't like, and I want you to challenge me to turn it into something fantasy, and it can be any object, any pack, yes, even my first pet stuff. Whatever you think is the ugliest object in The Sims 4, comment below, tell me which one you want to challenge me with, and let's see if I can turn it into something cool. I hope you found this tutorial helpful. Stay tuned to this series where I'll simplify the process of making complex arches, dragons, and spacecrafts. Please leave a thumbs up if you liked the video. Leave a comment and let me know if there's any specific content you want me to create, and subscribe if you want to see more content like this. Thanks for your wonderful support. Love ya!